Well, good morning, everyone. We are off for a fun adventure all about the history of spinach. And as I'm looking at my slides, I realized that I did not update it for this one. I did a similar presentation last year for Grand Ithra, but this is for West Coast Culinary Symposium 2021. Sorry about that. So my name is Eleanor, pronouns are she, hers. And yeah, my current geekitude is historic vegetables and researching what they were probably growing back in the pre-1600s eras, with the goal that by knowing exactly what our materials are, that we are creating these wonderful culinary recreations with, that hopefully then we can see and determine if it matters or not what varietal that we use. I kind of equate it to making a tea tunic, right? There are sometimes that making a tea tunic out of broadcloth or a cotton blend is totally awesome and it does the job. And then there's other times that you really want to step back and do like, okay, we're going to do the linen and the hand sewing and all the things to make it super, super historically accurate. So this is kind of my take on how to make sure that the culinary pursuits have some information to help them with those decisions. So spinach is a super fun and cool crop to explore. So we're gonna kind of go over a little bit of what is spinach, kind of a little quick highlight of the modern botany of spinach itself, the history of spinach, how it's changed over time, some modern equivalents for that spinach. We can chat a little bit about growing your own medievalish spinach. And if there's time, we can also talk about this other concept called the blights, which is a horrible name for a beautiful set of vegetables. It's kind of like your beets and your orach and things like that, good King Henry. And then I have some few extra slides if we want to really dive deep into the super archaeobotanical geekitude of like pollen and what does spinach pollen look like and pollen counts versus macro remains and all that kind of fun stuff. So without further ado, just please feel free to shout out with questions or type them in the chat and let the adventure begin. So spinach is in the amaranth family, or the Amaranthaceae family, which used to be known as the chinnopods, but it changed. Common name is the goosefoot family. And because for the most part, the leaves are kind of like these big triangles and they look like the footprint of a goose would be. So those are all our goosefoots of that. Spinach itself, the flowers are really small and they're wind pollinated. And so preserving your own seeds for spinach can be very difficult if you're growing more than one varietal in your garden or if your neighbor's growing them, because those the pollen just spreads. But that's actually kind of handy when we're able to look at it into the archaeobotanical record, right? Because there's pollen in the air of spinach, it could be preserved. The original spinach was was our separate male and female plants, which is called dioecious. And so that's one of those traits that throughout the domestication of plants, quite often you'll find that the male and females, they develop them so that both of those flowers are on the same plant, because then you don't have to worry about like your proportions to male to female to set seeds. So that's one of the other things that we can look at. And then the fruit, this is going to be critical as we start looking into the history of stuff, is the fruit itself is a hard seed cluster of several seeds, and then it's covered in a hard casing that has all of these little spikes coming off of it, and it looks kind of like a little Sputnik almost. I have some pictures later on that we can take a look at. All right, so where does the story of spinach begins? Like so many things, it starts in the Fertile Crescent area. And there's two main wild species. And so when you're looking at the history of vegetables, you try to find the area of where the species that is wild that most closely resembles the modern crop. And that happens to be in the Fertile Crescent for spinach. There's two main population sources. There's this Turkestanica and the Tetrandra. Anyway, for these two. And so they believe that these are the most closely related wild types. And so that's where spinach evolved. And then it's most likely that this spinach, the Turkestanica, is the one that has the closest highlights to it. And that's probably the strongest suggestion of where it is. So The first records of consumption are in Mesopotamia. Don't really see it so much in the Greek and Roman time period, but then again, that's like that whole thing is absence of proof, proof of absence, that gets quite tangled in the historical vegetable world. And then it starts showing up in European records in the 10th century in the Mediterranean and the Muslim territories, and then kind of 12th century or 11th century, more Spain, Iberian Peninsula, 11th century. And we're going to kind of do a fun deep dive into some of the new evidence, well, new-ish evidence that southern France in the 12th century, which pushes it back to the oldest documented record of it being within France. Before that, it was like Germany in the 13th, 14th century. So that's really fun. But the oldest written record of spinach is the 7th century China via Nepal. What, spinach in China? Yes, because spinach did this fantastic migration pattern of it went over to Europe, and then also it went over to Asia. So, right, can kind of see the trade route going on there. And so it's separated into two distinct directions. And now we have two distinct groups because the different areas selected different traits when they were doing the domestication of the spinach. So some of the similar traits that they have make sense because it's those traits that most domesticated crops are selected to have, which is, again, the male and female flowers on the same plant. We're going to have fewer seeds, so the carbohydrates that they're producing is being produced and is being shunted into the end product and not necessarily the reproductive product, which is important with spinach where we're eating just the leaves. It's a reduction of seed dormancy. So with that seed that's encased in all these things, and you'll see this a lot with a lot of our wild species or older heirloom types, is that the seeds have a coating on them that needs to get dissolved somehow, or they need to get roughened up, pass through a bird's digestive tract to start pollinate or to start germinating. And so quite often in domestication of vegetables, you're seeing a reduction of that trait. And so the seed dormancy reduces, and that happens in both Western and Asiatic selections. And then also a resistance to bolting. And so bolting is something that everyone who grows spinach kind of shakes their fists when it comes May or June time period, because what happens is those longer day lengths triggers the plant because it can has far red sensors, and it says, whoa, the days are getting long. This is going to be a perfect time to reproduce. And so when those daylights get longer, it bolts or it sends up a flower head. And quite often when that happens, it shifts the flavor profile. And because it's like leaves, we don't need to worry about leaves. We are going for the fruiting reproductive structures. So lettuce is a really big one that bolts all the time, and gardeners shake their fists at it. So reduce bolting characteristics for spinach. And then what happens, one of the main differences between the two is the shape of the leaf. And so a lot of the European cultivars after 1600s are adopted into kind of that round leaf shape that we really know and we think of when we think of spinach, kind of that wrinkly round leaf, right? But the Asiatics maintain that medieval hassetate or spear-shaped leaf shape. So this is one here. This is a modern Asiatic varietal. It's called Flamingo. And you can see where it still has kind of that spear-shaped leaf. And the more historic vegetable spinaches, as we'll see, has this really distinct, it almost looks kind of like a spear tip. But anyway, and then they maintain this really nice long petiole or stem on the leaf. Oh. So again, some of the changes that we'll see over time is before 1580, we pretty much can say that all spinach in Europe, and in Asia too, but in Europe were this spear-shaped leaf. So, yay. So if you want to grow spinach that looks like period spinach, you're going to need to focus on this kind of lance-shaped leaf. And then in the Western areas, we'll start to see this split. Gerard in his herbal is one of the first ones to mention the smooth, round, smooth-seeded, round-shaped leaf. And then it continues on from there. And around 1830s is thought when the Savoy characteristics, that bumpy, crinkly characteristics that I don't like because it tends to trap all the dirt in it and makes it just a pain to wash and to produce, where the smooth leaf shape is much easier to clean and not get that grit in your teeth. But the Savoy characteristic came along. It's thought to be part of a transportation issue, and that the Savoy characteristic holds up better for long transportation that kind of started to get going in the late 1800s. So when with the Asiatic types, you'll start to see, then they maintain that lance shape, which is really handy because some of those characteristics are now being brought over into Europe and to America's spinach productions. So I just went to the grocery store yesterday and I was so geeked because I looked at the vegetable aisle and they had spinach. And look at this, I got this spinach at the grocery store. Ah, so excited, right? This could be part of winter, but it has that kind of lance-shaped leaf structure. It also has kind of that thicker leaf structure. So I was super excited about that. Yeah. Yeah, again, somebody mentioned in the comments about it's a vegetable where market stability won out over other characteristics like flavor, for sure. And I did find that with this one. So even though this does have the same leaf shape of the medieval spinach, the texture is kind of cardboardish, which is sad, but it's the right leaf shape. We're getting closer. All right, so and then here are a couple of images on the slide of herbals that demonstrate that leaf shape. So there's the Italy 1330s on the left-hand side, and then France 1475 on the right-hand side. And you can see where those are just those really triangular leaf shape, right? Nothing round about it. And I love the one that is on the right-hand side, because quite often in the herbals, the spinach is described as having the shape of an oak leaf. And you think about that now, and you're trying to, take modern spinach and be like, how does this look like an oak leaf? But when you look back at the herbals and you see that it has those really lobed triangular leaf, spiky ones, that it could really look like one of an oak, especially the red oaks, right, that have those points. That's fun. So seed changes over time. Ooh, this is where it gets super, anyway. So what we're doing is reducing the amount of seeds per capsule. So, right, we have the capsule, which is kind of this huge involucre, or look at this one over here, the super spiky Sputnik one. That's one of the older ones, the wild ones. You can see how it would just like latch into some sheep wool or something and be transported across the world. But anyway, so they reduce the number of seeds per capsule. And one of the reasons that this occurs is because it makes it for easy sowing, right? You don't have to go back in and thin your spinach, because where you planted one capsule, you all of a sudden have 4 spinach plants growing. So seeds per capsule is reduced. The capsule size overall is reduced, right? Quite often we'll see this because it aids in mechanical processing of the seeds and planting of the seeds. The prickles are reduced. Again, it helps with the more mechanized aspects of it. And the prickled seeds is just kind of a pain when you're threshing spinach seeds. And then also, again, bolting is reduced, so you get a longer time of the crop production once it's in the ground. So this is super fun. The black and white picture is some of the carbonized remains that they found in southern France. And this dates to a development castle that was up on a hillside in southern France. And they found it in cesspits. So yeah, cesspits are our friend because they're waterlogged. It preserves the remains that quite often would decompose without some sort of like anaerobic or charred environment. So, and you can see the relationship between those ones that are in the archaeobotanical record and the ones that are wild, which are on the right-hand side. Oh. Pretty fun. So what do we have left over anymore? There's been some fun, really genetic tests that have been done, and breeding histories where you take one and you see how it evolved out into the multiple varietals that we have currently anymore. So with the Asian ones that are available to us in the North America seed market, two that are really coming on the scenes are Okame. I got mine from Nichols Nursery here in Oregon. And then I was super excited because Johnny Seeds, right, one of the huge main primary producers, seed suppliers, had one called Flamingo. And I think that might be why like we are able to now start to see some of the more spear-shaped leaves in the market a little bit better, is because my hope is that growers are like saying, oh, hey, that Savoy thing, maybe not so much, maybe the smoother leaf that is less sandy and annoying is better to grow. Anyway, for the Western types, all of them pretty much you can start, they centered back to Viroflay, and first documented record of that was in 1873, but it really has a lot of characteristics that probably trace earlier into the history. And then from there, we get some of these other named varietals that have very similar characteristics, which is the Amsterdam prickly seeded, Gigante de Inverno. And then there's another one that's out there, if you can find it. It had a brief kind of blip on the seed market where everyone's like, ah, this is a really cool old spinach seed. And then people tried to grow it and they're like, ah, really old spinach seed is really annoying to grow, right? Because it doesn't have all those domestication traits that we rely on and we enjoy within our modern agricultural practices. So people were always complaining like, slow grow, it just bolts and I can't get it to germinate, right? So all those kind of things that we just talked about. So, and then one of the big seed breeders for spinach was in the 19th century. The Dutch really got into spinach, and they are some of the prime breeders still of spinach types because of the really long day lengths, because they're up so far in those latitudes that those long day lengths really promote good spinach seed production. So if you were to want to grow your own, I highly recommend that you focus on what are called winter hardy types. Those tend to be ones that you plant in the fall and let it grow over winter. And then the goal with this is that you're getting as much growth. Well, let me backtrack. If you are in areas that don't get really hard frost, so growing zone 7 or higher, typically maybe even 6, you can plant them in the fall, get some good growth on them, and then you can pretty much harvest the leaves over the course of the winter with a really nice big flush in the spring, like so many of our vegetable crops. Once we're over that kind of hunger gap of February where it's just like, it's cold, it's dark, I don't want to grow. And then otherwise you can plant them in the spring as well, and they're really cold hardy and can grow, but most of these are super cold hardy. Yeah, and then what to avoid is avoid this Savoy leaf type. And it's not just because it's a pain to clean, like I keep talking about, then it's just because it's a little bit better, and the texture I find when I cook it is different. So I think spinach might be one of those things that it is worthwhile to look at for looking for those more medieval types, those pre-1600 types, to get a better texture and flavor profile into your cooking. All right, there are some super fun questions going on here. Zone 5, yeah, Canada. You can grow spinach, right? You can grow spinach. I grew spinach in Minnesota. You just need to, you can seed it, maybe, and then you put mattresses on it. I think somebody mentioned cold frame extensions, something like that, totally. And if you look in some of the garden treatises, they use these things called mattresses, which is just straw. And so it is documented if you wanted to get into the garden aspects of historic gardening to mulch your spinach, and it tends to help it a little bit better. So give it a whirl, it might be fun. So in the Northwest Seattle area, would you recommend covering during the darkest, coldest months? So it's really the growth slows down, not so much because of temperature. Whoa, 3B, yikes, I'm sorry, love to you. So in Seattle, the growth slows down, not so much because of temperature, it's because of daylight length. And so especially Seattle, higher altitude or latitude, you're like at 50-ish or so, 52. There's just not a whole lot of light that's going on. And so the plants and everything just kind of slows down. So Ooh, yes. Enjoy your spinach rabbit hole. 6B. It is a delight. And then the differences between modern and baby spinach in these varieties. Yes, very much so. Let's see. Do we have anything else fun? No. So what I have found is that the baby spinach kind of tends to get really gooey and watery, and it just kind of turns into like this limp mass. And so when you're looking at some of the more historic cooking techniques, quite often they are boiling the spinach and then they are chopping it up and then frying it. And that's a lot of heat that quickly breaks down the cellular structure of the spinach, especially with the baby spinach. And so if you are, and you're like, well, I'm going to be chopping it up and making it into a goop and maybe grinding it in my mortar. I find still though that there's just like this overall slime factor when you use baby spinach. And so I tested out this more modern variety or that I got at the grocery store yesterday that has like this, you can feel it, it's really rigid. I so wish we were in person so we could pass this around and everybody could chew on it. But I found this held up a lot better to the cooking practices, much better than baby spinach. And so this is a great time of year, both in your farmers markets and currently in the grocery store, that you can kind of find these winter spinaches that tend to hold up better. There's also kind of that classic spinach taste to it that I think with the baby spinach kind of dissolves away. Baby spinach is perfect for salads, right? Because it is that light taste and it has that kind of that less toothsome texture that a lot of modern palates don't care for. But the minute you start cooking it, it kind of just turns goopy and messy, whereas your older spinach like this. And I find the same holds true with the Savoy. It's a lot closer to medieval spinach than the baby spinach. But yeah, I think, and everyone, if you have experiences, feel free to chime in on your experiences cooking and tasting spinach too, because I am not a cook, I just garden things. Would Asian markets be likely to have the pointy leaf cultivars? I don't know, go explore. You never know what you're gonna find in super fun markets like that. Try it out. I don't know the culinary of that, so, but if you do, let us know, that'd be fun.
If your slideshow is done, do you want to unshare your screen so that we can see the leaves you're holding up better? Oh, no, you still have more. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just finish up slides and then we can stop sharing. Very good point. Thank you, moderator. And yeah, so planting your own planting times. As I described, you can plant them in the fall, overwinter them, or you can plant them in the spring. They're very winter hardy, which is lovely. Again, bolting, watch out for that. And yeah, and then harvest techniques, like the Good Housewife of Paris, 1300s talks specifically about how you take the seeds out or you pluck the leaves from around it and you leave the top growing point so you can just keep going. And over the course of the winter, as you're doing this harvesting technique, it becomes very much like a tree kale, almost it's like this tall tower of spinach. It's really fun. So here's a Galilee spinach that I grew in a pot. So if you are restricted to growing in containers, spinach actually does pretty darn well in containers. They might need a little bit more insulation around the roots in the winter. And then just really quick, these are all some of the cousins of the blights that we were taught, that I mentioned at the very beginning. And you can see when you're looking at the archaeobotanical remains of these seeds, how it can get pretty darn confusing, especially when you're looking at things like Atroplex here and how similar it looks to spinach, especially, you know, after the distortion that occurs with spinach seeds trying to hang out in the soil or in a cesspit for, you know, 400, 500 years. There's going to be some distortion. Or with charring, you know, you're heating it up the seed and sometimes the endocarp explodes out of the seeds and it totally distorts what the seed looks like. But, and with this, I just wanted to show this really quick, this similarity of the two here. And they're now looking at going back to some of the old old studies that were done, and what they're thinking that was classified as Atroplex or the Orach, it was actually spinach, right? And so there might be a means that spinach has been underrepresented within the archaeobotanical record because it was always classified and dumped into Atriplex instead of spinach, because there was kind of like this traditional knowledge that people had in their brains that, you know, spinach didn't come onto the scene until the 15th century or the 14th century. So that's pretty darn cool, I think. All right, and I think that's it. Yep, and that's what spinach pollen looks like. And if you want to get super geeky, this is a graph over here showing how the archaeobotanical record kind of predisposes for spinach not appearing. They took samples, the white bars of all the different samples throughout kind of the Netherlands, Northern Europe of cesspits. And then the top one is samples. The dark bars are where the macro remains, or actual like chunky bits of spinach or the seed was shown, and then the white bars are where the pollen was. And so you can tell that the pollen of spinach is much more representational of spinach's original spread throughout Europe. That's kind of fun, right? And then I left some references, but those are available on the group chat, or yeah, in the Facebook group. So, all right. Questions? Da-da-da-da. So how about 3B? It's gonna, yeah, I don't think it might not work too well to overwinter in 3B unless you're in a cold frame. And cold frames can do amazing things, especially if you have snow that acts as an insulative layer. So give it a whirl. High heat in the summer. Yes, no, don't try to grow this in the outlands. It's not good. Or if you do, make sure to try to push it in as early as you can get, because that high heat, and especially the high UV in the desert, especially high deserts, probably not going to be too easy to do. So yeah, try it in winter under a cold frame, especially because you can get the heat from the sun. Give that a whirl. Oh, yay, St. Croix, local spinach. That's fun. Yeah, so the local spinach available in St. Croix right now is amaranth. That makes sense, right? Because of the heat. It holds up really well to cooking without mush. Oh, that's great. And it might be an interesting substitution, very much so. And there's a lot of really fun tropical things and other types that hold up well, right? There's the New Zealand spinach type, or like in Fiji and some of those other tropicals, they have, they call it belly in Fiji. And I think it is a type of amaranth as well. That's cool.
I've also seen Malabar spinach at the markets too.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And then, so that dings in my brain. So like for the summer, a crop that also holds up better than spinach in the summer would be the or the Atriplex. So that might be a good one to try in the Southwest and see how it does. It tends to be a little bit more heat hardy and less prone to bolting. And that's a fairly documentable, that's a really documentable one. Can you post the website for the seed producers? Oh, yay, thank you. People are on it. Grow in containers. Yes, grow it in containers. So the root system is not that huge. And so if you have something like the one I showed the picture of, that was in a little 1 gallon container. And so I have some growing now in like 3 gallon, 5 gallon containers, and they do quite nice. So, and then because we're growing it for the vegetation and not the fruiting structure, it can take a little bit lower light levels. And so you can get away with growing it in like part shade just fine.
So I'm the person who asked the Asian market question.
Yeah.
I got South Asian markets and East Asian markets not too far from me. Northern New Jersey, it's an ethnic hodgepodge around where I live. So the question that I would have, which you might not know the answer to, but maybe other folks do, is what are the names of these spinaches in the other languages? Because I've gone shopping at South Asian markets many times and seen things with completely different names. And I got to spend some time looking it up and saying, oh, that's what this is. That's exactly what I want. So I'm just wondering, if you know, or if anybody knows, maybe they could post it in the chat. I'd be interested in knowing what like the Hindi word for these things are, or the Chinese word, or what have you.
That'd be great. I have no clue. That is a really, really good question. And I hopefully maybe somebody knows, or Google might be our friend in the moment. Yeah. And then, look for the leaf shape. Try to find that kind of really triangular leaf shape. And the super, so that really long petiole leaf stem, and then that kind of triangular leaf shape. But there's a lot of things that do look like this. So knowing the name would be really handy. Yeah. Let us know what you find out. That'd be cool. Growing indoors, let's see, today. Oh, thank you for the link to Johnny's Seeds. So that has the flamingo, and then there's Nichols Nursery is another one that I found, the Okami's Asian type. And then a lot of the other ones, Galilee was offered through Baker Creek, but I think they stopped offering it just because people were having issues growing it. But you can kind of find it sometimes on some oddball or some not so primary seed source catalogs. And then there's some that are actually being shipped out of, where is it? In the Middle East that you can get from the Fertile Crescent. I don't know if it's Pakistan or somewhere else, but there's a couple of seed suppliers from there. If you can just get it through customs. Let's see. I just pulled my 2 online grocery options and compared their options. Baby spinach has almost pushed adult spinach off the shelf. Yeah. And because it's so easy, right? You get a nice big tub of it. Ta-da, and you just grab a handful and off you go. And also for spinach, for raw salads, it's a little bit nicer. It holds up better to the modern palate. Tried growing Malabar spinach last year. Yay, I'm glad you're trying to work. Yay, that's awesome. Please let us know how that goes. Growing indoors, you can if you have good grow lights. But again, anytime that you start changing up the environmental characteristics, you kind of think of it as like terroir, right? The cold temperatures can actually shift the carbohydrate profiles that are within the plant. And so sometimes your overwintered spinach can taste different than spinach that's grown commercially in hothouses. So that's another kind of interesting characteristic and tying into the seasonality of salads. Let's see, growing good King Henry. Good. So I had tried several seasons to germinate good King Henry seeds with no luck whatsoever, right? It's one of those really old seeds that you have to just have the right systems or provide those right set of environmental factors for it to germinate. I did manage to find, we have a wonderful local nursery here, Time Gardens, and they had good King Henry starts. Wow, I can't say that name. And you just put them in the ground, and mine have been rocking it. Granted, I'm in Oregon in the Willamette Valley, so we don't get super hot, and it does pretty darn well. It does like a little bit more water, and I always put mine, even though it's a low grower, on the north side of my beds just to give it a little bit of afternoon shade. And I have found that that works pretty darn well. It does have a winter dormancy period. So in the fall, when you see it turning yellow, don't worry, that's just what it does. And then in the spring, it'll shoot back new growth. So it's one of those things that doesn't produce vegetation during the winter, but it will survive and be a perennial. So you can get it early season crops going from it. I have no idea what Molokia is. I don't know. Yay, something new to look into. That's awesome. If anybody knows, please shout out. No luck of the Malabar spinach. Yeah, it might be a heat issue because it is more prone for high heat areas. Maybe I don't know. Ooh, yep, thank you for North Shield growing in planters on the balcony with southwest sun. That should do very nicely. Oh, yay! Somebody already answered the Molika question. Is the leaves of the Crocorus oleotorus? I have no idea what that is. I love geeking out. Okay, great. more seed sources, more amaranth seed sources. Fantastic. Yay, yay for geeky tudes. Do you know if the stem was included when cooked or did they cut it off? I don't know. This would be a great question for the cooks of this group.
I mean, consider the fact that today I happily eat the stem and
Yeah.
food was scarce and valuable. I doubt something that tasted good and was edible was thrown out by most people.
Yeah, I mean,
But that's just, I guess, based on how expensive food was.
You see both in recipes that where they will specifically say to remove the stems and some specifically say to use it. So it may be preference just like it is now.
yeah, and spinach was right. Oh, let me get into like who was eating, you know, a kind of common potager ingredient, or is this more because it's so finicky to grow? Is this more like a status symbol that you could offer spinach? And so, but again, that's beyond my scope. Oh yay, somebody has what this Molochia is. It is part of the Malvaceae family, so the mallows. That is really cool. Yay. Very fun. Purple oak is easy to find in the farmer's market. Yeah, yeah. And the purple oak is one that you find quite often because it adds this nice punch of color to your salads. Both green and purple oak are mentioned in Gerard. So you're cool with either one of those. The green ones is the seeds are a little bit sometimes more difficult to find. Carrie, I don't know about heirloom seeds. Oh, that's awesome. Somebody's growing the native Chenopodium in California. Yay. So with that, right, whenever you're looking at growing these old seeds or these different varietals, like always keep in mind the potential for them to escape into the wild. And you don't want to be the next hotspot of an invasive species. So be mindful with your gardening when it comes to that. That's awesome. Burpee seeds. Awesome. Yeah, it has the Savoy leaf shape, so maybe avoid that if you're looking for super medievalness, but there are people that really enjoy that. So go for it. Yay, talk about removing stems or not. Yeah.
Eleanor,
Yeah.
on the just the botanical or gardening term of Savoy, is it in regard to spinach have anything to do with why Savoy cabbage is called that? Is there some consistency in the using that?
Yep, Savoy is bumpy. So the wrinkly, crinkly stuff. Yeah, so. All right. Sorry, did I overwhelm you with spinachitude? But yeah, so yeah,
Not
Meryl.
at all. Keep going with the spinachitude.
I can just sit here and eat it too. Oh, I so look forward to when we're all in a room and we can like pass stuff around and do taste testing and figure
Well,
it
if
all
you're going
out.
to be eating it, could you eat a couple different varieties and tell us the difference in how they taste?
Sure. All right. So this is the flamingo, the super spear shaped one that I am growing. Because I'm growing it in a hoop house, it might not be the most accurate because it doesn't have that winter. It's been a little bit warm, and so it's kind of lost some of its winter robustness. And so you can see that the leaf is fairly pliable. Let me move it back and forth. It has that really nice long petiole. And then for taste, it has spinach flavor. It's mild. You are crunching through some leaf structure. The leaf structure itself is fairly thin, but again, this could be, I think this is more indicative of it being grown in a hoop house and also that modern Asiatic type and not so much of a medieval characteristic. And then if we move over to the stuff I got from the supermarket that has those really large leaf shapes, also very long petiole. This, right? It's been in my crisper. It's not very crisp anymore. So I think the turgidness of this is more a reflection of it being shelf life than, you know, fresh from the garden like this other plant was. So let me see if I can find a little bit less lumpy example. Yeah, so this one's a little bit more. This one has a really strong, prominent midrib on the back. It's almost kind of raised up. And it is very, it has a little bit more structure to it. So, ooh, oh, that's some really strong spinach flavor that's going on there. And then when I cooked this up this morning, it maintained its rigidity a lot more. So that might be fun. It's almost, oh, has like a bitter aftertaste to it, where some of the more winter spinaches like viroflied, well, that's unfortunate, don't have that bitter kind of spinach kick to the back of it. And then baby spinach is baby spinach, right? It tastes like spinach, but then it kind of dissolves away. So, whew. All right, let's see. Any questions about that?
Well, I was wondering, I was wondering if the taste was oxalic acid, because I know spinach in theory is high in oxalic acid.
This tasted a little bit different than the oxalic acid. So that kind of has that, you know, lemony sparkle to it.
So they would put out the meat they were going to eat as part of the Seder meal.
Oh, I think we were just, was that?
And so, but at a certain point.
You froze for a second.
Put a phone out.
No,
Oh,
somebody just needs to mute themselves in the background.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was somebody chiming in or not. I wanted to make sure to give space for other folks and other opinions. So yeah, so the oxalic acid taste is like sorrel, right? Sorrel is really high in oxalic acid as a comparison, and it has that kind of the more bright lemony flavor, in my opinion. Whereas this was just kind of like that deep bitter green that you can sometimes get with summer kale. So kind of that glucosinoid bitter taste that comes with that. And it's kind of the ones that linger like a dark flavor in the back of your palate, and not so much the oxalic super tingly bit.
So perhaps something that is more suited to boiling and then frying to get out some of that bitter versus using it in a salad.
Totally. It's amazing how much just that boiling technique does transform the taste of the vegetables. Like I did it with Alexander root. Oh, and like raw Alexander root is disgusting. As soon as you blanch it a few times, same thing with like cardoons, right? It takes away. So thank you. It's very cool. So yeah, the spinach leaves are huge. And so that's what's really fun, right? So if you look at the some of the medieval manuscripts, especially like Tarentum Centenalis, right? The medieval health handbook, all those images that we just love and adore with the red borders. And people like poo-poo it because they're like, oh, that certainly can't be in proportion. I mean, who has seen spinach leaves that big? Or with the coleworts, right? With the kale, there are these massive leaves. And there are spinach leaves and coleworts that are that big. I mean, there's some things like the violas, definitely the proportionality there is a little, but yeah, spinach can get gargantuan, especially these big winter spinaches. They're super fun. So why spinach? Because it's awesome. And it's just a fun little geekitude. I just kind of randomly happen onto these little research rabbit holes. I'm trying to get better and more focused, like reading a recipe and then parsing out the different ingredients within that recipe. But let's see. Oh my goodness, we're blowing up. This is so fun. All right. Do you know if sorrel is usually eaten young? Ours is not pleasant when it's older. And it also depends on what kind of sorrel you're growing, right? So it's the ruminex, and then there's acetosa, and then there is the common garden sorrel. And then there's also the red vein sorrel. And although the red vein sorrel is very beautiful, whoa, it is a powerful flavor. And so with your sorrel, yes, the baby leaves are much better. They're a little bit more brighter. They don't quite have that density of I taste like a green leaf aspect going on. And then also it depends if you're growing a French sorrel, which tends to be a little bit more lemony and lighter in flavor versus your garden sorrel, which tends to just be a bit more in your face about sorrel. At least that's my experience. And if other people have thoughts, please chime in. Yeah, that balances out. So the frying, this is so cool. Yay. Yep, somebody prefers younger sorrel leaves. Yep, give it a haircut if the leaves get too long and compost it. My chickens adore it. Like that is their one favorite plant. And so if my sorrel gets out of control, I'll just chop it all back and give it to the chickens. Is my sorrel red or green? I think we are kind of just that. So I grow only the green types. I have grown the red vein sorrel. I don't like it. And so I try to focus on green. Yeah, so if you are growing the dark green with the red veins, try the green type. Yay, chard. Oh, so that's another super fun rabbit hole. It does work very well in 3B. And then chard like throws us into the discussion that we were getting into a little bit yesterday about beet greens and beet greens versus the beetroot itself. And so chard was most likely, right, is beet. So beet and chard is the same thing. It just was selected for different characteristics. So if you're growing, if you can grow chard, try growing some beets and harvest the beet greens. There's different ones that last pretty darn well. There's like Lute's green leaf beet, which is a lovely beet green. McGregor's is a really nice bright red one. And then there's other ones like the Capigeners, I think is what it's called, Capigeners, which has that kind of more historic carrot looking kind of beetroot instead of that bright red bulb. Although there was talk yesterday that one of the German herbals has the red beetroot picture.
So we are getting kind of into the end of our time period. So it is about 9:50 right now. And the next set of classes is going to start in about 10 minutes. So maybe we want to wrap up within the next 5 minutes.
Awesome. Yay, grow spinach, eat spinach. Oh yeah, so that's a good one. Good question, fun question about soil content affect your root vegetable. It kind of depends on your vegetable. Beets really love boron. And so use like one of the traditional methods of doing that is you sprinkle borax onto your beet beds. But it is kind of that terroir effect, both from the soil that you're growing it on and then also the temperature. Yeah.
Eleanor, my concern on the soil is that the hill I live on is primarily serpentine, which has a lot of arsenic in it. So I've been leery to grow any root veg because I figured that they'd be bad for me. Is that incorrect or do we know?
That is one that I would feel more comfortable kicking it over to somebody like an extension service because it's dealing with chemicals and health, and I wouldn't want to misspeak. There are studies done detailing out how much of various micro and trace substances are transported and incorporated into the leaf structure or into the root structure. Oftentimes that is dependent upon the plant itself and its ability to bioaccumulate those different chemical components. But yeah, I would, since you're talking about arsenic,
Yeah, I just figured that the beds I have the plants in, I've amended the soil, you know, for the top few layers. So the leafy stuff that's all surface plants, not so much a worry. It's the plants that would go deeper in and might get beyond the soil that I have amended. That was my concern, which is why I've steered away from root.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, but some of the roots are really shallow rooted and might still only be pulling stuff from your raised bed containers. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe radishes because the roots aren't so far down.
Yeah, could be.
And my husband really likes radishes anyway.
Ooh, so with radishes, try some of the white radishes. Those are really fun. They don't have quite that pepper radish kick to it. And there's some winter types that might do really well for you all in the fall or winter. They're the German beer radishes types. And then there's a modern white radish type called icicle radish, but it looks just like the pictures from like the herbals. It's really fun. I'll give those white radishes a try too.
The white roots video that you posted yesterday was totally awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was just so inspired by the seasonality of salad classes. I was like, I'm growing all the white roots. So very fun. And yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is like dive into the herbals, check out Gerard and Fuchs and see what's growing and start doing the comparison of what's in the grocery store to what you can find or what you can grow for sure. And just remember that, right? Absence of proof is not proof of absence. We're dealing with a area of study that doesn't preserve well in the archaeolobotanical aspects, and things are really thick and messy where names change, and so sourcing it through the literature is very difficult too. Right, so I'm much more of a proponent of could be, maybe, than no, never. So that's kind of one of my little soapboxes.
So on that note, we are at 5 minutes to the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And if people are ready to jump out and kind of jump into their next classes, they can, or hang out and chat. So recording it.